Emotional strength doesn't look the way we were taught to imagine it. It isn't loud. It isn't perfect. It isn't unbreakable. Real emotional strength is quieter, messier, and far more courageous than most people realize. It grows slowly, often in moments when no one is watching. And usually you don't wake up one day and declare, "I'm strong now." You notice it in small shifts, in how you respond, how you forgive, how you stay present when everything in you wants to run. Emotional strength does not begin with control, suppression, or positivity at all costs. It begins with permission. Permission to feel what is real without rushing to label it as wrong, dramatic, weak, or inconvenient. For many people, the earliest lesson about emotions was not how to understand them, but how to manage them for the comfort of others. Don't cry too much. Don't be so sensitive. Don't be angry, be grateful. Over time, those messages turn inward and become self-judgment. Feeling becomes something to apologize for. Avoidance becomes a survival skill, and slowly the emotional world shrinks. True emotional strength reverses that conditioning. It shows up when you stop fighting the presence of emotions and start listening to them. Instead of asking, "How do I make this go away?" you begin to ask, "What is this trying to tell me?" That shift is subtle, but it is transformational. Sadness might be pointing to loss that needs to be honored. Anger might be protecting a boundary that has been crossed. Fear might be asking for patience rather than pressure. When you judge these emotions, you silence vital information. When you avoid them, they don't disappear, they wait, and often return louder. Feeling deeply without self-judgment requires trust in your own inner world. It means believing that your emotions are not enemies but messengers. This does not mean indulging every feeling or acting on impulse. Strength is not emotional chaos. Strength is staying present long enough to let the emotion move through your body without turning it into a story about your worth. You can feel anxious without deciding you are weak. You can feel grief without concluding that you are broken. You can feel anger without becoming cruel. Emotional maturity is the ability to separate the experience of an emotion from the meaning you attach to it. Avoidance often disguises itself as productivity, humor, or constant distraction. It looks like staying busy so you don't have to feel lonely, staying polite so you don't have to feel angry, staying strong so you don't have to feel hurt. But unprocessed emotions demand expression. If they are ignored internally, they come out sideways through exhaustion, resentment, disconnection, or numbness. Emotional strength is recognizing that avoidance has a cost, and presence is the payment that leads to freedom. When you allow yourself to feel deeply, something unexpected happens. Emotions begin to loosen their grip. They don't need to scream when they are being heard. You stop bracing against yourself. You become kinder in your inner dialogue. Instead of asking, "What's wrong with me?" you ask, "What happened to me?" That single question shifts you from self-criticism to self-compassion. Feeling without judgment also changes the way you relate to others. When you don't shame your own emotions, you stop shaming the emotions of people around you. You listen better, you react less. You become safer to be honest with because you know discomfort does not need to be fixed, it needs to be felt. And in a world that rewards emotional armor, choosing to stay open is a radical act of strength. This is the paradox. The more willing you are to feel, the less controlled you become by your emotions. You develop resilience not by numbing yourself, but by trusting yourself. Emotional strength is not the absence of pain. It is the confidence that you can sit with pain without abandoning yourself. That quiet self-loyalty is what turns vulnerability into power. Growth often begins in a painfully ordinary moment, the moment you realize how exhausted you are from trying to be understood by people who have already decided not to listen. For a long time, seeking validation can feel like connection. You explain your intentions again and again. You soften your language. You offer context, background, proof of your goodness. You believe that if you can just find the right words, the right tone, the right timing, they will finally see you. But eventually, something shifts. You notice that the misunderstanding isn't accidental. It's chosen. There is a deep difference between someone who doesn't yet understand you and someone who refuses to. The first is open, curious, imperfect. The second is invested in a version of you that keeps them comfortable. When you keep seeking validation from those people, growth stalls. Not because you're doing something wrong, but because you're asking the wrong audience to confirm your truth. No amount of clarity will rewrite a story someone is committed to believing. Letting go of that validation is not easy. It feels like grief. Approval can become a form of emotional safety, especially if you learned early that being accepted required being agreeable, accommodating, or quiet. Walking away from that validation can feel like stepping into loneliness, but what you're really doing is stepping into self-trust. You are saying, I no longer need to prove my experience in order for it to be real. Growth begins when you understand that being misunderstood by someone who refuses to listen is not a failure of communication. It is a boundary. You stop contorting yourself into clarity and start honoring the truth that some people benefit from misunderstanding you. It keeps them from having to reflect, repair, or change. When you no longer chase their approval, you reclaim enormous amounts of emotional energy. Energy that was being spent rehearsing explanations, replaying conversations, and questioning your own reality. This doesn't make you cold or dismissive. It makes you discerning. You still remain open to people who ask genuine questions, who are willing to be uncomfortable, who don't weaponize your vulnerability against you. But you stop performing emotional labor for people who meet your honesty with defensiveness or dismissal. That choice is not arrogance. It is maturity. When you stop seeking validation from those who refuse to understand you, your inner voice becomes clearer. You rely less on external confirmation and more on internal alignment. You begin to ask yourself different questions, not do they approve, but am I being honest? Not did I explain that well enough, but did I abandon myself? Those questions lead to growth because they center integrity over acceptance. There's also a quiet confidence that emerges here. You realize that your worth has never been up for debate. It was simply placed in the wrong hands. And when you take it back, you don't need to announce it. You just move differently. You explain less. You over-apologize less. You make peace with the fact that being accurately seen by everyone is impossible and unnecessary. Growth does not require unanimous understanding. It requires self-respect. And sometimes, the bravest step forward is turning inward and trusting that your truth does not need permission to exist. Boundaries are often misunderstood as walls, cold, rigid lines meant to keep people out. In reality, boundaries are acts of courage. They are chosen in moments when fear and guilt speak the loudest, when old patterns pull you toward silence, and when the risk of disappointing others feels heavier than the risk of disappointing yourself. Setting a boundary is not a power move. It is a moment of self-respect that usually arrives shaking, uncertain, and uncelebrated. Guilt is almost always the first emotion to appear. It shows up especially for those who were conditioned to be accommodating in order to be loved. If you learned that your value came from being agreeable, helpful, or emotionally available at all times, then boundaries feel like betrayal. You worry you're being selfish. You imagine letting people down. You rehearse apologies before you've even spoken, but guilt does not mean you are doing something wrong. Most of the time, it simply means you're doing something new. It is the emotional echo of a system that taught you to prioritize harmony over honesty. Fear follows closely behind. Fear of conflict, fear of abandonment, fear that setting limits will confirm the worst things you've ever believed about yourself. Boundaries ask you to tolerate the possibility that someone might be unhappy with you and still remain intact. That takes courage. Not the loud, triumphant kind of courage, but the quiet kind that says, I can survive someone else's discomfort without erasing myself. When you begin to set boundaries, people often respond in revealing ways. Those who respect you may need time to adjust, but they stay open. Those who benefited from your lack of boundaries may push back, guilt you, minimize your needs, or question your character. This reaction can be deeply uncomfortable, especially if you are conflict avoidant or trauma conditioned. But resistance does not mean the boundary is wrong. It means the boundary matters. It exposes dynamics that were never built on mutual care. Boundaries are not ultimatums. They are not punishments. They are information. They say, this is what I need to remain in relationship without losing myself. When someone is unable or unwilling to respect that, the boundary reveals a truth you might have been avoiding. Courage is not forcing people to change. Courage is allowing their response to inform your next step. There is also a grief that comes with boundaries, the grief of letting go of who you thought people would be or who you hoped they could become. Boundaries ask you to face reality as it is, not as you wished it would be. That honesty hurts, but it also frees you from chronic disappointment. You stop bargaining for basic respect. You stop overfunctioning to keep fragile connections alive. You meet others where they truly are. Over time, something shifts internally. Each boundary reinforces a sense of safety within yourself. You learn that you can speak up and survive the outcome. You learn that discomfort is temporary, but self-abandonment has lasting consequences. That knowledge builds resilience. You trust yourself more. You stop seeing boundaries as threats to connection and start seeing them as requirements for healthy connection. Courage doesn't mean the absence of guilt or fear. It means acting in alignment with your values despite them. Every time you choose honesty over appeasement, you strengthen your emotional core. Boundaries become less about control and more about clarity. And in that clarity, you create the space where respect, peace, and authentic relationship can finally exist. Healing often stalls at the point where responsibility and blame get tangled together. Many people believe that if they take responsibility for their healing, they must also accept fault for what hurt them. That assumption creates paralysis. You either stay stuck in resentment, waiting for someone else to fix the damage, or you turn the pain inward and punish yourself for things that were never yours to carry. Real healing begins when you separate accountability from self-condemnation. Taking responsibility means acknowledging what happened and how it shaped you. It means saying, "This affected me, this changed me." It does not mean rewriting history to make the harm your fault. You can own your healing without owning the cause of the wound. That distinction is not subtle, it is essential. When self-blame enters the picture, healing becomes another arena for shame. You begin to ask what you should have done differently, how you should have known better, why you stayed, why you didn't speak up sooner. Those questions don't lead to growth, they lead to erasure. Self-blame often disguises itself as self-awareness. It sounds responsible, mature, even insightful. But underneath, it is a way to maintain the illusion of control. If everything was your fault, then maybe next time you can prevent the pain. The truth is harder and more freeing. Some wounds happen because of other people's choices, their limitations, or circumstances beyond your control. Accepting that reality does not make you powerless. It grounds you in truth. Responsibility begins where awareness meets compassion. You notice your patterns without attacking them. You acknowledge how pain taught you certain strategies for survival. Maybe you learned to stay quiet to stay safe. Maybe you learned to overachieve to feel worthy. Maybe you learned to disconnect in order to survive disappointment. Those behaviors once served a purpose. Healing does not require you to shame them out of existence. It requires you to thank them for their protection and gently choose differently now. When you take responsibility without self-blame, you shift from "what's wrong with me" to "what happened to me and what do I need now?" That question opens the door to agency without cruelty. You stop waiting for an apology that may never come. You stop rehearsing arguments with people who are unwilling to understand. Instead, you invest your energy in learning what helps you feel safer, steadier, and more alive. That is responsibility rooted in self-respect. This approach also deepens your empathy for yourself and others. When you understand that pain shapes behavior, you become less reactive and more intentional. You still hold people accountable, but you no longer confuse understanding with excusing. You can recognize harm without absorbing it into your identity. You can say, "That hurt me," without concluding, "There must be something wrong with me." Healing is not about becoming someone who was never hurt. It is about becoming someone who refuses to let pain define their worth. Responsibility here means choosing your well-being again and again, especially on the days when shame tries to convince you that you don't deserve care. It means seeking support without turning that need into evidence of failure. It means recognizing that healing is an active practice, not a verdict on your past. When responsibility is paired with compassion, healing becomes possible. You move forward not because you were at fault, but because you matter. And that truth, simple, steady, and non-negotiable, is what allows recovery to take root and grow. True strength is often misdefined as hardness, thick skin, emotional distance, the ability to be unaffected. We praise people who don't care, who brush things off, who stay composed no matter what they're facing. But there is a quieter, braver strength that doesn't get as much attention. It is the strength of staying soft in a world that repeatedly invites you to armor up. It is the decision to remain open without remaining unprotected. Staying soft does not mean staying naive. It means refusing to let pain turn you into someone you don't recognize. It means you still feel empathy, still experience wonder, still believe in meaningful connection, even after disappointment. Softness is the capacity to feel without becoming brittle, and wisdom is what teaches you where that softness belongs. Strength lives in the balance between the two. As you grow, you begin to understand that not everyone deserves the same access to you. Earlier versions of softness may have been indiscriminate, shared too quickly, extended without discernment, offered at the expense of your own needs. Wisdom refines softness. It helps you ask better questions. Not, "How can I be liked?" but "Is this relationship mutual?" You don't stop caring, you stop overgiving. You don't close your heart, you guard it with intention. Self-respect is what anchors this kind of strength. It shows up when you no longer tolerate connections that require self-erasure, when you stop laughing things off that actually hurt, when you speak your truth calmly instead of storing it in resentment. Self-respect does not make you harsh, it makes you clear. And clarity protects softness from becoming self-sacrifice. There's a moment in growth when you realize you don't need to harden to be safe. You need boundaries, you need discernment, you need the confidence to walk away from spaces that ask you to shrink. Staying soft means you are still deeply human, still emotionally available. But now, your availability is a choice, not a reflex. This strength also shows up in how you respond to pain. Instead of shutting down or lashing out, you learn to pause. You let emotions pass through you without letting them dictate your behavior. You allow yourself to grieve without becoming consumed. You forgive without forgetting the lesson. Softness allows healing. Wisdom ensures you don't repeat the same cycles. In relationships, staying soft while becoming wiser means you communicate instead of disappear. You listen without abandoning your perspective. You care about impact, not just intention. You're no longer impressed by intensity alone. You look for consistency, accountability, and care. And if someone cannot meet you there, you don't harden, you step back. What changes most is your relationship with yourself. You stop needing to punish yourself to improve. You stop motivating growth through shame. You treat your own inner world with the same compassion you offer others. That self-kindness doesn't weaken you, it stabilizes you. From that place, self-respect becomes natural, not forced. True strength is tenderness with a backbone. It is a heart that remains open, paired with the wisdom to protect it. It is knowing that becoming colder is easy, but staying soft, awake, and self-respecting takes courage. And that courage allows you to move through the world with both depth and dignity, without losing yourself along the way. Emotional resilience does not come from getting everything right. It is not forged through flawlessness, relentless positivity, or the appearance of having it all together. In fact, the pursuit of perfection often weakens resilience because it teaches you to hide when things fall apart. Real resilience is built in the moments when you tell the truth about where you are, stay present with what hurts, and choose to live in alignment with your values even when it's uncomfortable. Honesty is the foundation. Not the polished version you offer the world, but the quiet, internal honesty that asks, what is actually happening inside me right now? Resilient people are not those who deny their emotions, they are the ones who name them. They admit when they are overwhelmed, unsure, or afraid. This kind of honesty doesn't make you fragile, it gives you a starting point. When you stop lying to yourself about your limits, your needs, or your pain, you stop building your life on unstable ground. You can't heal what you refuse to acknowledge. Presence follows honesty. It is the practice of staying instead of escaping. When discomfort arises, the instinct is often to distract, minimize, or rush past it. Presence asks something braver. It asks you to breathe, to feel your body, to sit with the moment without demanding that it be different. This doesn't mean drowning in emotion or replaying the pain endlessly. It means allowing the experience to exist without resistance. Pain that is met with presence softens. Pain that is avoided hardens. Resilience grows when you trust yourself enough to remain with what's real instead of running toward what's comfortable. Integrity is what turns honesty and presence into strength. Integrity means your inner values and your outer actions begin to align. You stop saying yes when you mean no. You stop editing your truth to keep peace that costs you your self-respect. You make choices based not on fear or approval, but on what feels deeply right. This doesn't guarantee ease. Often, integrity complicates things. It may disappoint people, disrupt familiar patterns, or require difficult conversations. But it builds a steadiness inside you. You know who you are because you act like it. Perfection, on the other hand, is exhausting and brittle. It teaches you that mistakes are failures instead of feedback. It trains you to perform instead of participate. When perfection is the goal, vulnerability feels dangerous and growth feels conditional. Emotional resilience cannot survive in that environment. It needs room to stumble, reflect, and adapt. It needs compassion after collapse, not punishment. Over time, honesty, presence, and integrity reshape your nervous system. You become less reactive and more responsive. You recover faster, not because you're unaffected, but because you don't abandon yourself when things go wrong. You trust that a hard moment does not define you. You know how to check in, recalibrate, and move forward with care. Resilience is not about being unshakable. It's about being real and coming back to yourself again and again. It's about choosing consistency over perfection, truth over image, and alignment over approval. When you live this way, strength becomes something you inhabit, not something you have to prove. And that kind of resilience doesn't just help you survive difficulty, it allows you to remain whole while you move through it.